Hey everyone, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. There's $42.5 billion or so in broadband deployment money that we are waiting on, and there are concerns that the Buy American provisions in the legislation will be at odds with the goal of closing the digital divide. So be right back and we'll discuss that. Thanks for joining me. Rick Husey here with Broadband Deployment News. So saw this article that is in Fierce Telecom. It says Buy America poses threat to U.S. fiber deployments. So I thought I'd take a look at this and then also take a look specifically at what the NOFO, or the Notice of Funding Opportunity, says for BEAD and what those restrictions or requirements are. So let's take a look at this. So in his recent State of the Union address, President Biden said all construction materials used in federal infrastructure projects, and he specifically mentioned fiber optic cables, must be made in America. So this would obviously apply to BEAD. Now, I wonder if it applies to anything that's coming out now or recently, like ARPA, for example. Still lots of funds for ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act, that are being applied to broadband. So we've seen a lot of that that's been awarded recently, and there's more to come, I think, on that. There's still money left over. So he mentions, or it says here specifically, federal infrastructure projects. On its face, it sounds like a nice policy that even Democrats and Republicans can agree on. Unfortunately, sometimes there are no U.S. suppliers for certain components of fiber optic cables. And this has obviously been a real issue with coming out of the pandemic and supply chain issues. A lot of that starting to loosen up, but it still is going to be an issue because frankly, we don't manufacture enough stuff here in the United States. That some of that became apparent during the pandemic, where we still could have problems sourcing stuff in the United States, even if supply chains loosen up further. So, New Street Research policy analyst Blair Levin wrote today, this was a couple of days ago, that Buy America policy, if strictly enforced, could cause significant delays in actual deployments. It would be ironic if one good goal of government, to buy American, neglected another good goal, to close the digital divide. CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association, Gary Bolton, said this is a pretty sticky situation. Bolton said the U.S. Office of Management and Budget has been taking comments on the Buy American mandate, and those comments closed last week. One thing it will be looking at is the percentage of any component that must be made in America. Currently, the threshold is 55% of a component, but OMB could move that threshold up or down. There are also waivers that can be done specifically that are mentioned in BEAD that we'll look at. What components are we talking about? The Fiber Broadband Association says in 2022, U.S. manufacturers produced about 72 million miles of fiber optic glass. This was produced by vendors such as Corning, Prysmian, and OFS. Bolton said the fiber optic glass is not the problem in terms of Buy America. The U.S. actually exported fiber optic glass last year, but fiber is more complex than one might think. And then there's a little breakdown of the fiber. And you can see here, obviously, you've got your shielding, dielectric kind of stuff. And just the glass is just the part that goes in there that transmits the light, but you've got all the stuff that needs to go around it, including, you see, petroleum, resin, helium. I was not aware of helium. Neon, methane. So you've got gases in there that help things transmit better, I think. And those are things. Certainly, helium is something that has been hard to come by. If you've tried to have a party and go get balloons, especially there for a while, it was really difficult. The fiber optic glass, which looks a bit like fishing line, is surrounded by coatings and support structures. These coatings and support structures use elements such as helium and neon, and products such as petroleum, steel, and resins that are often sourced from outside the U.S. For instance, U.S.-based Corning is a major supplier of the fiber cables that protect and organize the hair-thin strands of fiber optic glass. Last August, Corning announced it was building a new plant in Arizona, supported by AT&T and record industry broadband demand. Corning already has 2 other manufacturing plants in North Carolina, so that's good. But even though Corning and others are making cables in the U.S., they probably have to source materials for those cables outside the U.S. A lot of stuff comes outside the country, said Bolton. He noted there is other equipment necessary for fiber deployments too, such as cabinets, splitters, optical line terminals, and optical network terminals. And even though there are American manufacturers for electronics, such as Calix and Adtran, their OLTs and ONTs include chips, which are often manufactured in foreign countries. So will the boom times continue? Bolton said, the fiber industry made great strides in 2022, passing 7.9 million homes with fiber, and it could pass another 9 million homes in 2023. In addition, the industry has closed lead times on fiber supplies down to less than 10 weeks. However, all of this progress has been made without following strict Buy American mandates. So, while we've made this progress, they haven't had that requirement or regulation maybe that they were having to follow. So I was going to look at what's in the NOFO, just kind of read through that. So, or at least these portions of it. You see, all funds made available through the BEAD program for broadband infrastructure must comply with the Build America, Buy America Act. Build America, Buy America Act requires that all of the iron, steel, manufactured products, including but not limited to fiber optic communications facilities, and construction materials used in the project or other eligible activities are produced in the United States unless a waiver is granted. The Secretary of Commerce may waive the application of this preference when, 1, applying the domestic content procurement preference would be inconsistent with public interest. 2, the types of iron, steel, manufactured products, and construction materials are not produced in the United States in sufficient and reasonably available quantities or a satisfactory quality. So, number one, if we look at this and it's like, well, if we stick to this, then it means we're going to not be able to meet our broadband deployment needs. That would be the public interest, right? Because that's the whole purpose of this money. So if they look at this as a whole and say, if we stick to the percentages here, let's say they don't raise or lower the percentages, we're not going to be able to meet the needs of this program, and we're not going to be able to give everybody broadband that we want to. That would be something I would think would qualify for number one. Then you got number two. Obviously, if you can't get the parts here in the United States, or if they're inferior quality, then number three, if the inclusion of that stuff will increase the cost of the overall project or eligible activities by more than 25%. And certainly that is the case sometimes. Sometimes it's more expensive to get stuff here in the United States because of just the kind of pay that we have, union pay or just regular pay of, where things can be produced cheaper in other countries, even shipping the stuff over here. Sometimes that is an issue. Of course, we do want to buy American where we can. So you're balancing this need of trying to get everybody broadband and using these taxpayer dollars to get broadband deployed. And then how much money are we going to use to try to buy American? And are we able to get broadband everywhere if we do that? So again, it says here, the Secretary will seek to minimize waivers, and any waivers will be limited in duration and scope. So the Secretary of Commerce can waive some of this stuff, Buy American on certain things, in addition to what they were talking about doing with the Office of Management and Budget. And then continuing on here in the NOFO, if the manufactured product was manufactured in the United States, and the cost of the components of the manufactured product that are mined, produced, or manufactured in the U.S. is greater than 55% of the total cost of all components, that means that it would be considered produced in the United States. So if everything that you're buying and put this thing together, if all of the components is 55% or greater than 55% of the total cost of all components, that would be considered made in America. However, unfortunately, things like processor chips sometimes are the most expensive thing in a piece of equipment. So if you've got, you got your enclosure and you've got circuit boards we can get here in the United States, and there's other components, but that some of the processors could be, I suppose, some of the more expensive components in that. Plus, again, that considering other things that you might not be able to get here in the United States could kick that up over or under 55%. In addition to these provisions, subgrantees may not use BEAD funding to purchase or support any covered communications equipment or service as defined in Section 9 of the Secure and Trusted Communication Networks Act of 2019. So we want to be careful in getting any equipment from foreign governments, especially certain governments that, in addition to just wanting to be able to buy American, and that way we're, supporting American businesses and supporting American people, the American people who work there. We have this issue of, security. So it says here, additionally, the Infrastructure Act expressly prohibits subgrantees from using BEAD funding to purchase or support fiber optic cable and optical transmission equipment manufactured in the People's Republic of China, unless a waiver of this requirement is received from the Assistant Secretary. And, there are already provisions for certain equipment like Huawei and ZTE where you cannot get that equipment. This mentions there's other manufacturers that I don't think have specifically been named that you can't use, but here it says any equipment made in the People's Republic of China, and including the fiber here, not just equipment. Waivers of the ban on Chinese-made fiber will be based on a demonstration from the eligible entity that application of this prohibition would unreasonably increase the cost or delay the project or other eligible activities. Waiver applicants will need to provide concrete evidence of this circumstance and will be held to a high burden of proof. So fiber is, as far as security goes, is less of an issue because it's fiber. So there's not anything in there other than the glass and the covering, unless they somehow sneak something in there that could monitor traffic. I think the real concerns, obviously, with the Chinese government would be the fact that, again, the companies that are there generally, the Chinese government and those companies are almost one and the same, unlike here in the United States where you've got private companies there kind of connected with the government. So, they have to do what the government tells them, really must do what the government tells them. So that's the concern there with something like that. So again, on the fiber side, I don't think it's an issue unless they could somehow get some kind of snooping, really tiny snooping technology in the fiber. I think it's going to be more the equipment that they're concerned about there. So I could see there being waivers for fiber more so than there would be for equipment, but sounds like we have a good amount of fiber made here. So we'll have to see how this all balances out. Again, it's you're kind of walking the line there, walking the fence on, we want to make sure everybody gets broadband, but we also want to support, again, American businesses, American workers, those kinds of things. So it remains to be seen where we go on that and whether we get the waivers. I could see maybe the OMB reducing the burden on Buy American and maybe a little bit more loose on the waivers from the Commerce Department, and again, reducing the percentage in order to make something Buy American. It all depends, I guess, on the cost structure and what is hard to get, whether it's the processors, those kinds of things. But certainly we do want things to be made in America if we can, so that would be great if we can. If we can't, we also want everybody to broadband. So how do we decide? Got to look at the facts, so we'll see how that goes. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate it. If this was helpful, if you'd give me a like on the video. If you're not subscribed, click the subscribe button, click the bell to be notified when I'm live. Thanks a lot. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.